In the forgotten hills of eastern Kentucky, where morning mist still clings to valleys that time seems to have abandoned, a documented case has puzzled historians for nearly 2 centuries. Back in 1834, the Reverend Ezekiel Morrison and his 9-year-old twin daughters, Rebecca and Rachel, arrived at the remote Baptist congregation of Pine Hollow, a community so isolated that maps from that era barely acknowledged its existence. What unfolded during their 3-day stay was carefully recorded in the personal journal of Pastor William Phillips, a document uncovered in 1987 when the old church was finally torn down. The journal entries describe events so precise and unnaturally accurate that modern psychologists have studied them extensively. Yet no one can explain how 2 young children could possess knowledge that defies every rational explanation. The Morrison twins didn't just predict future events. They uncovered secrets buried for decades, described people they'd never met, and spoke of tragedies that occurred years before they were born. But perhaps most unsettling of all, every single detail they revealed turned out to be absolutely verifiable. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to face mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality itself. Before we go deeper into the Morrison case, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to uncover details most historians refuse to discuss. And tell us in the comments which state you're listening from, because what happened in Kentucky might have happened closer to your home than you think. The story doesn't begin with the supernatural, but with something far more unsettling: the possibility that some human minds can access information in ways science still can't comprehend. The Kentucky of 1834 was a land caught between wilderness and civilization, where communities like Pine Hollow existed in near total isolation among the Cumberland foothills. This particular settlement had been founded in 1818 by 3 families seeking religious freedom away from the denominational conflicts plaguing larger towns. By the time the Morrisons arrived, Pine Hollow consisted of barely 200 souls, most related by blood or marriage, all bound by the strict Baptist doctrine that governed every aspect of their daily lives. The community centered around a modest wooden church, built with their own hands from timber cut from the surrounding hills. Pastor William Phillips, a learned man who had left his comfortable life in Lexington to serve these frontier souls, kept the only written records of births, deaths, marriages, and major events. His meticulous nature would prove crucial in documenting what was about to happen. Ezekiel Morrison was a familiar figure along the circuit of remote churches scattered across the Appalachian region. Tall and weathered, with prematurely gray hair that spoke of hardships beyond his 34 years, he traveled on foot with his daughters, carrying only a worn leather satchel containing his Bible, a few personal items, and the journal where he recorded his spiritual observations. He had been widowed for 9 years, ever since his wife Sarah died giving birth to the twins during a terrible winter storm that had left their cabin isolated for weeks. The girls, Rebecca and Rachel, were strikingly identical in appearance, yet completely different in temperament. Rebecca, born first by mere minutes, had an outgoing nature that drew people to her immediately. Her smile was infectious, her laughter genuine, and she spoke with the confidence of someone far older. Rachel, quieter and more observant, seemed to live in her sister's shadow. Yet those who looked closely noticed she often started sentences that Rebecca would finish, or answered questions directed at her sister before Rebecca had a chance to respond. What made the Morrisons particularly noteworthy among circuit preachers was Ezekiel's reputation for bringing spiritual renewal to struggling congregations. Stories followed them from church to church, tales of backsliders returning to faith, of communities resolving long-standing conflicts, of spiritual awakenings that lasted for years after their departure. Some attributed this to Ezekiel's passionate preaching, but those who watched more carefully noticed that the real changes often began after private conversations with the twins. The journey to Pine Hollow had been especially hard. Late autumn rains had turned the mountain paths into treacherous mud, and Ezekiel had been forced to carry Rachel for the final 5 miles after she developed a fever. They arrived at sunset on November 15th, 1834, just as Pastor Phillips was finishing evening prayers with the handful of congregants who attended weeknight services. Phillips later wrote that his first impression of the family was one of profound weariness, not just physical, but spiritual. Ezekiel's clothes were travel-worn and patched, his boots thin from countless miles of mountain paths. The girls clung close to their father, Rachel still pale from her fever, Rebecca's usual brightness dimmed by exhaustion. Yet something in their eyes, an alertness